Beyond just love and hate relationship, from Munir back to Pervez, the US game with authoritarians. Ex-CIA officer now reveals why US keeps dictators close to them.
When US President Donald Trump met Shehbaz Sharif and Asim Munir on the 30th of September, many were surprised. This is because usually Trump's meetings with world leaders are one-on-one. But in this case, Trump was meeting the two from Pakistan. In the past few months, Trump has been very vocal about his problems with Venezuelan dictator Maduro. In both his terms, the American president has openly said that he would be ousting Maduro, imposed sanctions on Caracas, and also rallied countries to pressure Maduro to quit. But this doesn't seem to be the case with General Asim Munir.
He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Donald Trump was all praises when he met with Field Marshal Asim Munir. Not only did he call Munir a very important man in Pakistan, but also was happy with the way Munir praised him. But contrary to what one might believe, throughout history, US has loved working with authoritarian governments. During the Cold War, the US backed anti-communist governments that were authoritarian and were often unable or unwilling to promote modernization. US officials have been accused of collaborating with oppressive and anti-democratic governments to secure their military bases in Central America, Africa, Asia and the Middle East. There are several examples of US helping out authoritarian governments. The US government provided military, logistical and other aid to the Chinese government, led by Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang in its civil war against the indigenous Chinese Communist Party led by Mao Zedong. Both the KMT and the CCP were fighting against invading Japanese forces until the Japanese surrendered to the US in August 1945. The surrender brought an end to the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo and the Japanese-dominated Wang Jingwei regime. After the Japanese surrender, the US continued to support the KMT against the CCP. The US airlifted many KMT troops from central China to Manchuria. Approximately 50,000 US troops were sent to guard strategic sites in Hubei and Shandong. The US trained and equipped KMT troops and also transported Korean troops and even former Imperial Japanese Army troops back to help KMT forces fight and ultimately lose against the People's Liberation Army. During the late 1980s, President Ronald Reagan intervened in the Iran-Iraq war in support of Baghdad and Saddam Hussein, ultimately leading to the Iraqi victory. The US engaged in an undeclared yet bloody naval and air war, while Iraq fought a brutal land war against Iran. US intelligence helped Saddam's Ba'ath Party seize power for the first time in 1963. Evidence suggests that Saddam was on the CIA payroll as early as 1959, when he participated in a failed assassination attempt against Iraqi strongman Abd al-Karim Qasim. In the 1980s, the US and Britain backed Saddam in the war against Iran, giving Iraq arms, money, satellite intelligence, and even chemical and bioweapon precursors. As many as 90 US military advisors supported Iraqi forces and helped pick targets for Iraqi air as well as missile attacks. One of the longest standing examples is the US alliance with Saudi Arabia. Since the 1940s, American presidents have maintained close ties with the Saudi monarchy, an absolute kingdom where political dissent is not tolerated and basic freedoms are tightly restricted. In exchange for a steady flow of oil and cooperation in counter-terrorism, Washington has supplied Riyadh with hundreds of billions of dollars in arms, even as the kingdom's human rights record has drawn international outrage, from the war in Yemen to the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Another stark case is Chile under General Augusto Pinochet. In 1973, the US Central Intelligence Agency backed a coup that overthrew the democratically elected socialist leader Salvador Allende. The move was part of a broader Cold War effort to contain leftist influence in Latin America. What followed was a brutal military dictatorship under Pinochet, marked by mass arrests, torture, as well as executions of political opponents. Repression carried out under the shadow of US approval and economic aid. A similar story unfolded in Iran in 1953, when the US and Britain orchestrated Operation Ajax, a covert coup that toppled Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh's move to nationalize Iran's oil industry threatened Western interests, and the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored to power with Washington's backing. The Shah's rule brought rapid modernization but also deep repression, enforced by the feared secret police, SAVAK. For decades, the US turned a blind eye to these abuses until the discontent it helped create erupted into the 1979 Islamic Revolution. In Egypt, after the assassination of Anwar Sadat, Hosni Mubarak came to power in 1981 and ruled for 30 years with US military and economic support that exceeded $60 billion. Washington saw Cairo as a vital partner for the Middle East peace, control of the Suez Canal, and cooperation against terrorism. But behind the stability was an authoritarian system defined by censorship, police brutality, and the crushing of political opposition. Conditions that ultimately fueled the 2011 uprising that forced Mubarak from power. This goes up a notch when it comes to Pakistan. Since Pak's creation in 1947, the US has maintained a complex relationship with Islamabad, marked by alternating cycles of alliance and estrangement. But one consistent pattern stands out across decades: Washington's repeated support for Pak's military rulers. From the Cold War through the fight against terrorism, successive US administrations have prioritized strategic interests over democracy in South Asia. The first clear instance came under General Ayub Khan, who seized power in a military coup in 1958. The Eisenhower administration, however, quickly embraced him as a reliable anti-communist ally. Under Ayub, Pakistan joined US-led defense pacts like SEATO and CENTO, and in return, Washington poured in military and economic aid. American weapons and training strengthened Pak's army, helping cement its dominance over civilian institutions, a legacy that still shapes the country's politics today. The pattern repeated under General Zia-ul-Haq, who overthrew Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in 1977. Despite Zia's imposition of martial law, harsh censorship and public executions, US support only deepened after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Pak became a frontline state in the Cold War, channeling billions of dollars in American weapons and funding to Afghan Mujahideen fighters. Zia's regime grew immensely powerful during this period, and US officials largely ignored his domestic repression and the rise of religious extremism as long as Islamabad served Washington's regional goals. After a brief return to civilian rule, the cycle resumed under General Pervez Musharraf, who took power in a coup in 1999. Following the 9/11 attacks, the US once again turned to Pak's military for cooperation, this time in the war on terror. Washington lifted sanctions, provided over $20 billion in military and economic assistance, and designated Pakistan a major non-NATO ally. While Musharraf publicly pledged democratic reforms, his rule was marked by media crackdowns, political manipulation, and extrajudicial detentions, all of which the US largely overlooked for exchange for counter-terrorism support. Well, in the corridors of Washington during the Cold War, there was a saying that summed up American foreign policy at its most cynical: he may be a dictator, but he's our dictator. That phrase, often attributed to US officials describing allies like Nicaragua's Somoza or the Shah of Iran, captures the real logic behind decades of American support for military regimes. It wasn't about love for authoritarianism. It was about fear. Fear of communism, fear of instability, fear of losing influence in a region that might tilt towards Moscow or Beijing. In essence, the US supported military regimes not because they embodied American ideals, but because they served American interests. Stability, control, and predictability, these were the currencies of the Cold War diplomacy, and so time and again Washington found itself shaking hands with men in uniforms, trading moral principle for strategic comfort, as has been the case with Pakistan.
Beyond just love and hate relationship, from Munir back to Pervez, the US game with authoritarians. Ex-CIA officer now reveals why US keeps dictators close to them.